thank you, and Vic, thank you, and Lou, and Scott, thank you for the terrific work you're all doing. Thank you, first of all, for being in the profession you're in. My wife is a Guild member, as many of you know, in Cleveland, and a very active Guild member that is sometimes disappointed as a Guild member, that particularly how difficult it is to get younger Guild members involved, and I particularly congratulate those of you that are younger, part of this local, and what you're doing and how you're fighting back. And thank you for the profession you're in. From the intimate way I know the journalism profession through my wife, I just see every day how much harder it's getting, how you really are forced to do more with less. The extra work you're expected to do, particularly as reporters. I know that angle better than I do copy editors, photographers, but I know all of you are expected to do more with blogging, with all you have to do that way, with almost never additional compensation. And I know you didn't get in this profession to get rich. You got in this profession because you believed and you fundamentally understood that your profession stands between corrupt government and real democracy, and stands between a vibrant middle class and the kind of corporate governance that we're seeing again and again and again. Just look at what's happening in Wall Street now. Look what's happening in neighborhoods in Dayton and Springfield and Xenia, or in more rural areas and even suburbs that are more affluent, what's happening with more mortgage foreclosures, and all those kinds of issues that you write about, that you explain, when you unveil and unearth corruption, how important that is so we can have real democracy, we can really have a thriving, prosperous middle class. And without the work you do, no matter how management treats you, without the work you do, this wouldn't be happening. That's why people like Wes and Chris, so many of you are here in the labor movement supporting the rest of you in the Guild, because they know it doesn't just matter to your benefits and your wages and your treatment in the workplace. It matters as it ripples all the way through our society. So thank you so much for all you do that way. Many of you in my campaign 2 years ago heard this story, but I'm going to tell it again anyway for the few of you that didn't, and I apologize. I wear in my lapel a pin that really speaks exactly to what Jane was talking about. It's a depiction of a canary in a bird cage. You remember 100 years ago, the mine workers used to take canary down in the mines. And if the canary died from toxic gas or from lack of oxygen, the mine worker had to get out of the mines. He had no government that cared enough to protect him. And in those days, he had no union strong enough to protect him, and he was on his own. And you go back 100 years ago, a child born in this country had a life expectancy of about 45 years in those days. Today, we live 3 decades longer, and if you had to say one reason for that, it would be the union movement. It would be the union movement that made sure we had Social Security and Medicare, made sure we banned child labor, made sure we had workplace protections, made sure we had a minimum wage. And that's why what you do today, what you're doing at your paper is so important. And even though, as we've seen, journalism has taken hit after hit after hit, and journalists themselves have taken hit after hit after hit. And you just one example that astounds me everywhere in the state. I don't know if any newspaper does this now, has a labor reporter. I don't think the Daily News anymore has a labor reporter. The Plain Dealer doesn't have a labor reporter. I don't think probably the Dispatch doesn't. All these papers have basically now have business sections where they put all the labor stories, but there are no labor reporters writing about what affects people every day. Business section is real important. We ought to be talking to the business community about business Miami Valley. God knows we need to create more jobs here. We also ought to have labor reporters in a labor section talking about the dreams and the hopes of workers and of working class folks and working class citizens. And that's simply not to be seen in newspapers nearly enough around the country. And that again is why your own members, but the labor movement's always stood for way more than their own members. And that's what morally is so uplifting about what you do, the canary in the cage. People, again, they live 30 years longer today because the labor union, the labor movement has fought not just for their members, but frankly for management always does better when you're doing better. The whole community does better when you're doing better. And last point I wanted to make is we have seen in the last 7 or 8 years a National Labor Relations Board that is the most hostile to working people, working families' interests, union and non-union workers alike. And we see on issue after issue after issue, Batista, it's called the Batista NLRB because he's the chairman of it now. They've done everything they can to peel off members, to peel off union members and enlist them as management, so that those workers, millions of workers, because the Kentucky River case and other cases, millions of workers have left the ranks of organized labor and gotten out of the bargaining unit, not of their own will, not of their own desire, but because of these NLRB decisions. And you can bet that management, whether it's the Dayton Daily News, whether it's Cox, whether it's GM, whether it's a smaller company in between, that management always knows they have a friend at the NLRB. They have a friend in Washington, and they know that they can do whatever many times, they can go over the line. They can do lots of things they wouldn't do if you had an NLRB that was, I'm not saying it should be pro-labor, I'm just saying it should balance the interests of workers and labor. When the NLRB was formed, it was formed because in 1935, Franklin Roosevelt and progressives in Congress, Democrats and Republicans alike, understood that this country would be better off if we embraced the union movement, if we had more people in the union movement rather than fewer. And there's a reason we have a strong middle class in this country. There's a reason, and that's because so many people joined unions in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And there's a reason now that the middle class is under fire, and the middle class is weaker than it was 10 years ago, and that's because they have an NLRB that almost always sides with management, and sends that message out from the strike, the PATCO strike of the early 1980s until 2008 in the NLRB we have, the message across the country consistently to management is you can do darn near anything you want and we'll okay it. That's why your fight is, that's why others are here today to support you, because your fight is your fight, but it's also my fight. It's also the fight on behalf of workers, not just in the Miami Valley, but all over this state and all over this country. That's why next year we have a new president, a president that frankly is more interested in the middle class and less interested in Wall Street. When we have a new president, we're going to see the Employee Free Choice Act pass, and we're going to see a whole different country and a whole different world. That's my commitment. I stand with you as you fight for this. So do people behind me and everybody in this room, and we'll work together. Thank you.